Tonight, our guest speaker will be DiFranco, who has been on our forum here many times. And his topic tonight is the threat of Islam. Take it away, Dan.
Not much needed for an introduction. The title's pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just go ahead and jump right into it here. Um, I've got this presentation into four parts. One is starting off with some Bible verses. The second is talking about the person of Muhammad, because Islam is essentially a personality cult. We'll talk a little bit about Islamic conquests and then wrap it up with Islamic beliefs. So I've got all the verses that I'm going to use on the screen, and I believe I've got everything in New King James. We'll start off Genesis 16:1. Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai, and Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Then Sarai said to Abram, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between you and me." So Abram said to Sarai, "Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please." And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from and where are you going?" She said, "I'm fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand." Then the angel of the Lord said to her, "I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man, his hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all of his brethren." So it's almost a prophecy given on what the descendants of Ishmael would be like, and it seems pretty accurate. All right, so 13. And then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees." For she said, "Have I also here seen him who sees me?" Therefore, the well was called Ber Lahai Roy. Observe, it is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, who Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. All right, so jumping a little further ahead to 17, verse 17. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, "Shall a child be born to a man who's 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who's 90 years old, bear a child?" And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." It was still his son. Even though it wasn't the child of promise, we've got hindsight to look at this. He cared about his son, and 100 years old, you're not going to think you're, going to have children, especially with a 90-year-old wife. But God said, "No, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I've heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful, and I will multiply him exceedingly. He shall beget 12 princes," which that's interesting, same amount that Jacob ends up having. "But I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time set up next year." When he finished talking with him, and God went up from Abraham. So Abraham took Ishmael as son, all who were born in his household, and all who were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskins the same day as God had said to him. And I looked this up a few weeks ago. I think Muslims still practice circumcision, but I don't think it's consistently on the eighth day. There's variations between the different sects, but it's, for the most part, they still do practice it. 24. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. The very same day, Abraham was circumcised, and his son Ishmael, and all the men of his house, born in the house or bought with money from a foreigner, were circumcised with him. All right, skipping ahead to Genesis 21:1. Then the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age. at the time set of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. So as the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. So I just want to interject here briefly. I don't know if it's completely uniform among the rabbis, but numerous rabbis believe that word scoffing has actually has a sexual connotation to it. So there's many rabbis that believe that Ishmael was actually molesting Isaac, which is why Sarah was so mad. Get this kid out of here. Once again, it's just don't know if it's true or not, but I do know that in some cultures that's done as a sign of dominance. So just something to consider. Let's see, verse 11. The matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman because he is your seed. So Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water, and putting it on her shoulder, he gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. All right, a few more verses about Ishmael. 15, the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. Then she went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bow shot, for she said to herself, let me not see the death of the boy. So she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of the God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him up with your hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave it to the lad to drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. All right. A little further, Genesis 25, when Abraham dies, it states that both Ishmael and Isaac came together to bury him. It gives the names of his 12 sons, and it says that Ishmael died at 175 years of age. Let's see. I've got one more verse here. It won't let me back up. There we go. It was a delay. Genesis 28:6. This is with Esau. Esau saw Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take himself a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he gave him a charge, saying, you shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan, and that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and had gone to Padan Aram. Also, Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please his father Isaac. So Esau went to Ishmael and took Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebajoth, to be his wife, in addition to the wives he had. So this is the last time I saw Ishmael mentioned in Scripture, and it just shows that at some level the lines of Esau and Ishmael merged together. All right. So where do the descendants of Ishmael go? If you see on the map here, the light green, those are the areas that most scholars think that they went. Essentially, what were most of Saudi Arabia and the Sinai Peninsula. Several of the names of his sons are mentioned in Scripture. I think Kedar and Nebaioth, and several of these also became the names of towns as well. At the time, Arabia was very polytheistic at the time. Moving forward, with Ishmael, they seemed to be monotheistic for a while. But as we get into the time of Muhammad, Arabia and the Arabs were very polytheistic. There were some monotheists, and there was a mix of Jews and Christians in there as well. But this was the traditional language of that area, or religion of that area. All right, so let's talk about Muhammad. Muhammad was born in 570 AD in Mecca. He became an orphan when his dad died. I think he was like uh, 6 months, I think it was, before he was born. His dad died, and then his mom died when he was 6. So he was raised a little bit by his grandfather, then his uncle. His uncle trained him in archery, swordsmanship, and martial arts, and his uncle taught him the caravan trade. So several Islamic narratives relate that Muhammad as a child went on a trading trip to Syria with his uncle Abu Talib and met a monk named Bahira, which I think this is a Christian monk, who said to him that was said to have foretold his prophethood. And although, as you're going to find with reading the Quran or stories about Muhammad, there's a lot of multiple versions of stuff. A lot of things contradict each other, as does this story here. When he was 25, he met a 40-year-old woman who was wealthy, and she was a merchant. And being that he had learned how to caravans and merchant trading with his uncle, she was very impressed with him and his competence, and she proposed marriage to him. So Muhammad accepted her offer and remained monogamous with her until her death. Well, then he gets a bunch of other wives, but that's another story. All right. Okay. So this next thing I'm going to show you is the Kaaba. This is the modern Kaaba that's in Mecca. This is where Muslims do a pilgrimage to. It's got a black stone, which we'll see in a moment here. Tradition holds that the Kaaba is over 5,000 years old, and it was built by Abraham and Ishmael. And it was designed as a sanctuary. In 605 AD, the custodians decided to build a roof on the structure. It had just been a series of walls, and a dispute arose of who would have the honor to put the stone in the finished building. Then the tradition says that Muhammad came up with a solution. He put the stone in his cloak and had each of the other 4 guys grab a corner so that everyone felt like they had a part to play in bringing the stone back into its place. And supposedly they thought Muhammad was, very wise because of that. So here's another picture, an artist rendition of what the ancient Kaaba maybe looked like. Maybe like a type of altar. It seemed to be the central point of the villages and towns, much like a town square is today. This is the black rock that's in Mecca. Their tradition says that it came from Adam, and then the angel Gabriel gave it to Abraham, and then gave it to Ishmael, and then it throughout went to the descendants of Ishmael. All right, so the financial security Muhammad had, because he had a wealthy wife, gave him plenty of free time, and that he spent in a cave in a place called Hira. And according to Islamic tradition, in 610 AD, when he was 40 years old, the angel Gabriel appeared to him during his visit to the cave. The angel showed him a cloth with verses on it that ended up being part of the Quran and instructed him to read it. When Muhammad confessed illiteracy, Gabriel chokes him forcefully, nearly suffocating him, and repeated the command. As Muhammad reiterated his inability to read, Gabriel choked him again in a similar manner. This sequence took place once more before Gabriel finally recited the verses, or Muhammad did, allowing him to memorize them since he was illiterate. It's kind of just a strange story. I don't see angels in the Bible at all choking people until they get the point, but that's what they believe. And as you learn about the story of Muhammad, it reminds me a lot of Joseph Smith. No witnesses. It was just him and the angel. Paul even had witnesses to his blinding and things like that, because everything needs to be established out of 2 or 3 witnesses. And Muhammad, it was him and quote unquote Gabriel that gave him these visions. So he ends up having more and more visions and more appearances from Gabriel. And then it was his wife's cousin said that he had a prophetic calling on his life, and he went around and told a bunch of people Muhammad's a prophet. Then his wife's cousin ends up dying, and so there's no way to confirm it. But Muhammad started to believe, and we'll read the scripture later, that in Deuteronomy 18, God says to Moses that I will raise up a prophet among your brethren like Moses. Muhammad believed that to be himself. All right. For a while, he stopped having visions. He became suicidal, was about to jump off a cliff, but Gabriel stopped him and confirmed that he was a prophet. All right. So in 613 AD, he starts publicly preaching his visions and the things that Gabriel and or God told him. He starts to gather a following, but he also has a lot of detractors too. So at this time, he's in Mecca. Uh, there was so much pushback that there was bans on trading with his family and their entire clan. So let's see, 619, his wife and uncle die, and then it's said that Muhammad has a miraculous journey to Jerusalem. So he's on some sort of, if you can see the picture here, some sort of weird wing creature with the face of a woman. And so what supposedly happens is he had a supernatural journey from Mecca to Jerusalem and back in the same evening. That's 1,800 miles round trip. And time must have slowed down or something, and he ends up talking to a lot of the dead saints, and just a weird story. That's one of the reasons, though, Jerusalem is considered a holy site in Islam as well as Mecca. All right, so and supposedly during this time period, he had scribes that were writing down these visions, or at least fragments, or at least remembering them orally, because as we'll talk about later, they do end up getting written down. So 622 is where a lot of things begin to change. Because of the pushback he had in Mecca, him and his followers go to Medina, and they set up the first mosque. Initially, oh yeah, this is an interesting tidbit. Muhammad's religion originally had no way to have a call to prayer, like the Jews would blow a shofar and stuff. And so what they ended up doing was having some guy say Allah Akbar. And that was when they all knew it was time to prayer. So that's a very old tradition for the Muslims. So while in Medina, he institutes a constitution. And so you can see some of the things on the screen that the constitution held. They promised the Arabs, the polytheistic Arabs, and the Jewish tribes that they would live peacefully alongside of them, and they'd refrain from making a separate treaty with Mecca. It also guaranteed the Jews freedom of religion. And in the agreement, everyone under its jurisdiction was required to defend and protect each other if attacked. Politically, this agreement helped Muhammad better understand which people were on his side. Following the emigration, the people of Mecca seized the property of Muslims immigrants to Medina, and war would later break out between the peoples of Mecca and the Muslims. Let's see. Okay, I can skip that. So at this time, in Medina, it really starts taking off. Nobody knew Muhammad there. He wasn't. He was new. He was fresh. Had these new ideas, and so they started to get quite a following in Medina, enough that they started mustering up armies. And so then the talk of peace and all that went out the window. So in 624, you had what was called the Battle of Bador. And I don't know that I need to go into much detail. I got quite a bit to go over, and some of the battles aren't necessary to give too much detail on. Essentially, to maybe give a brief summary of a lot of these battles, is they were outnumbered quite a bit, at least from Islam's side of it. And they kept winning these battles that they were outnumbered. And so they just took it as a sign of God. Another battle was the Battle of Uhud. I can't see what slide number I'm on. I got on my notes which slide for which part of my notes, and I'm kind of losing my place here. All right, not necessary. I'll just summarize. I don't have to go over the slides here. So he had a series of battles. Muhammad starts attacking a lot of caravans. The leaders of the area assemble an army as a result to fight back against him. The Battle of Uhud was next, and they did lose quite a bit of men in this battle. So that's when Muhammad came up with polygamy. He's like, "Oh, we got all these wives, we got all these women. We can allow this because they don't have a male protector." And uh, as you'll see, or as you do your own research into Muhammad, it just seemed like he did whatever he wanted. And but since he quote unquote got visions from God, then everything became okay, and it was actually divine because Muhammad did it. So yeah, polygamy was not allowed before, but then Muhammad wants to do it, and hey guys, it's okay now. So hey, God told me it's all right. Such is the history of cults. All right, so the Battle of Trench was a big battle. In Medina, you had 3,000 Muslims, and they defended against 10,000 invaders, and they won. There was one story of some Jewish tribes, Banu Karazu, and they beheaded 900 of the men. And this was less than 10 years after Muhammad said, "Hey, we'll live in peace with you guys. You guys can practice your own religion." Yeah, it didn't. Once he got the upper hand, once he had numbers on his side, once he could go to battle and fight, that's what he did. All that peaceful stuff went out the window, which is why the Quran contradicts itself so many times, and that's you'll see scholars or Islamic apologists try to make excuses for it, but the reason why is because whatever way the wind was blowing, that's what he did, and that's what was written down as what he did. So it was at first, yeah, we can be peaceful when we don't have the advantage, but once we have the advantage, then we can kill all the infidels. All right. So let's see, we're almost done here with Muhammad. So there was a treaty that he had after that big war with Medina. It was a 10-year peace treaty, and within 2 years it was violated. And Muhammad marched his men to Mecca, and they overthrew it. And for the last few years of his life, the policy seemed to be convert to Islam or die. In a 10-year span, they ended up conquering most of the Arabian Peninsula, and at that time, Muhammad dies. So, understanding Muhammad and at least a cursory understanding of him and his life is crucial to understanding Islam because it is essentially a personality cult. Whatever Muhammad did, whatever Muhammad supposedly said, for the most part, is what Islam believes. Let's see here. Okay, so after Muhammad's death, a guy by the name of bin Talib started to compile the things that were written down about him and some of the oral teachings. That's eventually what became the Quran, which I'll talk about the Quran a little bit later. One unique thing about the Quran compared to the Bible, the Bible has 66 books, 40 different authors, written over 1,500 years in 4 languages. Moses had contemporaries. He had Aaron, he had Hur, Joshua, Caleb. There were 70 elders that all witnessed the testimonies and the revelations. This is one guy with visions. Nobody to back up what he said. There's no 2 or 3 witnesses. This is one deranged lunatic and what he believed and what he lived. And that's where this religion comes from. I saw one paragraph that I think sums up Muhammad the best. Muhammad promoted pedophilia, rape, murder, torture, intimidation, blackmail, extortion, adultery, assassinations, killing Jews that protected him, destruction of other Arab holy sites, racially cleansing Arabia of non-Arab Muslims, and promoting a hateful, intolerant, expansionist, and authoritarian religious political ideology that seeks to conquer and force all mankind to become willing or unwilling slaves or die. A lot of adjectives there, but it fits. That's when pedophilia. He took a girl as at 6 to be his wife, and it was said it was consummated at 9. I mean, the guy was just a lunatic. Um, and a religion is literally formed around him. All right. So, why was Muhammad successful? From what I can tell, is that the Arabs were very fractured. You had a lot of nomads and Bedouins. They didn't really have a unified identity. Islam gave them an identity. They were sons of the promise now, no longer second fiddle, because I'm sure that, they knew the history that they were Ishmael and Isaac, and regardless of the fact that Ishmael, we just read those promises that he would be a great nation and he would be blessed as well. But they were pretty much a mess. They had been attacked by the Byzantines, the Caesarians, a number of other different tribes. They had no unifying aspect, and that's what Islam gave them. One author, and I'll mention his name at the end, he had a really good take on it. He said that Muhammad took tribalism. In other words, our people are good, everybody else is bad. We're the chosen people. And we can plunder and rape and pillage, and that's okay. But he blended it with theology. So the moral maybe check or safeguard that a lot of people would have was out the window, because he said this stuff is godly. This is holy. It's okay to plunder. It's okay to pillage. It's okay to rape, because God says we can. And that's the type of people it still attracts today. All right, so after Muhammad dies, the caliphate is established. Caliph is the Arabic word for successor. Some thought Muhammad's father-in-law was the rightful heir. Others thought his cousin was, because his cousin was blood related. And this conflict is still around today. This is the difference between the Shia and the Sunni Muslims. About 85% of Muslims are Sunnis. They believe in succession by election, and the Shias believe in succession by being a blood relative of Muhammad. And Shias are about 15% of the current Muslim population. So to this day, the guys that wear the black turbans, that means they're a descendant of Muhammad. So like the guys, especially in Iran, there's a lot of Shias in Iran. In fact, I think I have it later in my notes. Iran is by far the largest Shia nation, and I think 90% of Iran is Shia Islam. All right, so this is a little bit after the time when Muhammad dies. So in the green here, you can see that most of what's Saudi Arabia now, Yemen, Oman, the Gulf states here, Arabian Peninsula, essentially is what they controlled. The Sasanian, which was it was a Persian empire, and the Byzantine, which was the Eastern Orthodox, they were their main competition, you could say. So after Muhammad died in 632, was probably the most crucial time for Islam becoming a religion. You had a lot of other people stepping forward and saying that they were prophets, and these tribes, they no longer wanted to pay tribute after Muhammad died, because they considered that to be an ending of the contract. Muhammad treated both believers and Islamic believers, as well as Jews and Christians, were like a mafia boss. Like, you pay me money and I'll protect you. And they're like, we don't need to do this anymore, these other tribes. And so then Islam had what was called the Ridda Wars, which they considered that at the time that they got rid of the apostates. Many historians believe without these wars, Islam would have ceased to exist. Just another dead prophet. So within 2 years, opposition was squashed and Islam became a mostly unified front. Then they started conquering. The Sasanian Empire, they basically took it over. A lot of the Byzantine Empire, they took over as well. So I think I got it on my next slide here. Okay. This is astounding. So when Muhammad was alive, right when he died, this is the brown area is what they controlled. Within 30 years, look at how much they took over. And mind you, this is 630 AD, no modern, implements, old school horses and boats and soldiers and so a lot of this was the Byzantine Empire, traditionally Christian areas, Syria, what is Israel now, Egypt, parts of northern Africa. These were all Christian areas. By 730, this is what they conquered. So this is 100 years. 711, they conquered Spain. It's almost like nothing could stop them. In fact, 75, I think it's 75%. Yeah, 75% of the Christian world was taken over by Islam within 100 years of it starting. Europe, a lot of times we think of Christianity, we think of Europe, and it was there, but it was not the stronghold of Christianity. It was around these areas here. I mean, Paul's letters were to Asia Minor. You had a lot of Greeks. Rome's mentioned too, but it was more, this area was the stronghold of Christianity, not so much these other areas up here. Some think that these conquests were a major factor in the Dark Ages of Europe because of a lot of the economic consequences of what happened. Trade to the east was then very difficult. You had a lot of pirates, Islamic pirates at this time. It it cut off Asia and the Middle East from Western Europe. And the speed at which these conquests happen have been debated among scholars for generations. The Muslims believe it's proof that God's with us. How else could we do it otherwise? Others believe that the Byzantines and the Sasanians were weakened because of a lot of Prolon fighting, and I'm sure that was part of it. And so they are easily able to mop up. But what I found interesting was there was a 7th century book in this time period called The Apocalypse of Suedo Methodius. And the author of the book, it's attributed to a guy that lived in the 400s, and people know it. He wasn't the author. They think it was just some monk. But what I found interesting was why he said this happened. He thought it was because Christians were so full of sin that this was God's judgment. Particularly, he said sexual immorality, because at this time, he said there was men dressing like women and women dressing like men and all sorts of sexual perversion among the Christians. And he felt that was directly tied to this Islamic conquest. So just tuck that away in your brain, because I think we may be going through something similar now. He actually said in the book that he felt it was no different than like the time of Judges, when the Midianites or one of the other ites came up against Israel because of their sins. All right, so by the time you get to 732 AD, the Muslims made it all the way to central France. A man by the name of Charles Martel mustered approximately 15,000 troops and was set to defend the town of Tours. And they defeated an invading force estimated at 80,000. And many cite this battle as what saved medieval Europe from a full takeover of the Muslims. Islam is not too keen on this battle, and they call it the Battle of the Martyrs because so many Muslims died. But I read one account where Charles Martel said he prayed because he didn't know what to do and saw this area of ground illuminate where he felt God was telling him to put their troops and set up, and that's what they did. And I remember that some of the accounts of the battle is they set up like a phalanx where they all had their backs to each other with spears because the Muslims were attacking on horseback. But it's a very noted battle. And like I said, many people think that this is what saved Europe from getting completely swallowed up by Islam. Charles's grandson, incidentally, was Charlemagne. So, all right. So The Muslims at this time, after this battle, continued to raid France. They took over Sicily. They even attacked Rome in 846. They looted St. Peter's Basilica and St. Paul's Basilica. Muslim pirates attacked throughout the Mediterranean, and they attacked pilgrims going to Jerusalem. This is the backdrop of the Crusades. So, for several hundred years after this Battle of Tours, um, pilgrims wanted to go to Jerusalem, and they were just mercilessly attacked, as well as pirate attacks. Some of the stories I won't repeat of what I heard of what they did to some of the nuns, but it was so bad that finally there was a call to respond to it. It's estimated in 1 year that 30,000 churches were destroyed. In modern times, they present the Crusades as peaceful Muslims attacked by these bloodthirsty crusaders. And I'm not saying the crusaders were perfect. In fact, when you look at the Knights Templars and some of the stuff they got into, they pretty much became a secret society. The things with the gold and the papacy and all that was definitely corrupt. But the way Hollywood shows the Crusades is complete nonsense. You had, if anything, it was peaceful Christians that had been in the lands that they were living in for 500-600 years after the crucifixion that were attacked unprovoked by Islam. So that's the more truthful side of history. So in 1095, Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade at the Council of Clement, and he urged Western Christians to take up the cross and liberate Jerusalem. And he also, as the Catholic Church does, he offered spiritual rewards that those who participated had remission of sins. So, yeah, you lived a bad life. If you go fight for us, you'll have the slate wiped clean. The First Crusade was from 1096 to 1099, and it was the most successful of the Crusades from a European perspective. The Jerusalem was captured in 1099, and they established several Crusader states: Jerusalem, Edessa, Antioch, and Tripoli. So the Second Crusade was launched after the fall of Edessa, and this crusade was considered a failure and failed to make significant gains. Saladin reconquered Jerusalem October 2nd, 1187, which ended 88 years of Crusader rule. Okay, I did not know this before I did the study. I did not realize Islam controlled Jerusalem for as long as they did. From that 88 years that the Crusaders were in Jerusalem, Muslims ruled Jerusalem for 1,200 years, ending in 1917. All right, the Third Crusade was known as the King's Crusade, led by figures like Richard the Lionheart. It failed to retake Jerusalem, but secured rights for pilgrims to visit the city. If you saw the 90s film with Kevin Costner, the Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, that was set in this time period. You had Morgan Freeman was supposed to be a Moor, and anyways, that was the Third Crusade. The Fourth Crusade was a major turning point. This crusade never reached the Holy Land, but instead they attacked and sacked Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, a fellow Christian power. So it was mostly internal squabbles. And there were other later minor crusades for almost 200 years. I think about that, like how much times have changed where, 200 years from us, that was like early 1800s, long time ago in history, but that's how long these crusades went on, for 200 years. That was just what they did. Every other generation or so, we're summoning soldiers and we're going to go back and fight the Muslims. So, all right. So during the time period of the 8th century till about the 13th century, historians and Islamic apologists consider it to be the golden age of Islam. You had a massive influx of wealth from plunder. That's where I think a lot of it came from. When you look at any culture that has a lot of wealth and has relative peace, they tend to be prosperous. And I know Islam wasn't very peaceful in the areas that they didn't own, but if you got back to Mecca and those areas, they didn't really see much from attacks because of the stronghold that Islam had become. So it's true, you did have a lot of technological advances in this time period. Baghdad and Cairo became major centers of education. Medicine, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, engineering. They really did excel at that. They also started studying Greek and Roman manuscripts, and Europe had pretty much abandoned the Greco-Roman principles. It wasn't until the Renaissance that Europe picked up those ideas again. In fact, the Renaissance is known as the Renaissance because it was a restoration of Greco-Roman ideas. But they learned it from Islamic scholars because they preserved the history of Aristotle and Plato and Greco-Roman thought. So this was considered their golden age, but I think a lot of it had to do with the fact they had the wealth from plundering half of Europe. But all right, so this golden age ended with attacks from the Mongols. So the Mongolian attacks were brutal on Islamic lands. From 1219 to 1260, they devastated Central Asia, Persia, and the Middle East. A lot of people died. Really set the Muslims back quite a bit. What what helped the Muslims is a lot of the Mongols ended up converting to Islam, and that caused a lot of internal problems from the Mongols. But by the time that happened, the damage had really already been done. So with the Mongols not much more of a threat, the Ottoman Empire began. So this began in 1299. And I should interject here that there were areas of influence in Islam that weren't all in the same geographic area. It didn't all originate from Arabia like it originally did, because in the case of the Ottoman, they started in modern day Turkey. So they're unified in theology, but the center of power shifted over time. There were times when it was closer to Egypt and Syria, and so I just want to inject that. But the Ottoman Empire becomes one of the biggest empires that the world has seen. So over the next 100 years, they take back much of the Middle East, Asia Minor. They spread into southeastern Europe, particularly Greece and Bulgaria. During the 1400s, they continued further until they capture Constantinople in 1453. So think about that. This had been a Christian city for roughly 1400 years, at least 1300 years. Christians had been there. I think it was 300 something AD that Constantine, named it after himself. But this was a center of power for Christianity, and sacked in 1453, taken over. And I think it was in 1930 they changed the name to Istanbul, which it's known by now. All right, so Islam takes over a lot of Eastern Europe, but Western Europe finally gets out from some of the clutches of Islam, particularly Spain. The late 1400s were huge for Spain. They ended Muslim rulership after over 800 years. 800 years they were under Islamic rulership. 1492 is a pivotal year for Spain. They call it the Reconquista. And so I don't know if I have the definition of that in my notes here. Maybe I do. No. Okay. So basically, it was the kicking the Muslims out. It was taking Spain back by the Catholics. Yeah, and ended 800 years of Muslim rule on the Iberian Peninsula. The Alhambra decree was later in that year. That's where they kicked all the Jews out. But it started with the Muslims. And from what I was reading, the Spanish Inquisition was way more about Muslim expulsion than it was Jewish expulsion. It was both, but that was the impetus was we need to get these Muslims out of here. After 1502, Islam was made illegal in Spain, and they forced the Muslims to either convert, leave, or face death. And then also in 1492, we know the story of Columbus. But a lot of historians think he sailed west. I mean, it was said that he was trying to find a route to India, but part of the reason he was trying to find a route to India is because the way to get there was so dangerous because of all the Islamic pirates. All right, so in the 15 and 1600s, the Ottoman Empire reached its peak power, conducting massive expansion into Europe under Suleiman. Key conquests included Belgrade, most of Hungary, the Battle of Mohacs, Rhodes, the Battle of Lepanto, and that's an interesting battle. That was 1571 because you had a lot of Europe that had been fighting each other that they team up together to fight the Muslims. You had papal powers, you had Spain, you had Venice, you had some of these Italian city-states. Like, we got to do something about Islam, and they all team up together. And in the case of the Battle of Lepanto, it was a naval battle. They ended up winning. So one of the most pivotal battles of this time period was in Vienna in 1683, which, if you look at a map, Austria is in the center of Europe. They once again had come in and were continuing to push and expand and conquer and conquest. But this was a major battle. It's estimated there's 300,000 Ottomans and 70,000 defenders of some of the Holy Roman Empire, Poland, Austria, Habsburgs. Once again, everyone came out of the woodwork because, hey, we might fight each other, but we got a more serious problem here that we need to look at. So, but one of the biggest reasons the Ottoman Empire went in decline was the New World and the resources of the New World. The Ottoman Empire suffered extremely high inflation due to the influx of American silver and other commodities, and was negatively impacted by the new maritime routes that bypassed Ottoman-controlled land and instead was going to the New World. So between the resources and the silver, and it's almost like we don't need you anymore. And so it started a major decline of the Ottoman Empire. 1700s, they started declining. The West starts rising. Okay. So most people, if you ask them what was the first war after the Revolutionary War, they would say the War of 1812. That was the first war with Europe. The first war we had where Congress actually approved war was the first Barbary War. The Barbary War was against the Barbary pirates, who were Muslim pirates in roughly Morocco, Algiers, that area of northern Africa. So what was happening is the European powers were paying tribute so they wouldn't get attacked going through Islamic waters. And since America was no longer under British umbrella, the Muslims started attacking our ships, and they ended up capturing one of them. And they held a lot of hostages. And so Jefferson, he tried peaceful methods, and those failed. And I'll read the quote that he got, which pretty much sums up Islam. I'll read that later in this discussion. But anyways, they captured a vessel. They had a lot of hostages. And in 1805, the Marines, they captured the city of Durba after a 500-mile trek through the North African desert. And that gave them leverage to negotiate the release of the hostages and maybe a more fair situation for us to go through the waters. But this was not the only Barbary War. They didn't hold their end of the bargain. So if you know the Marine song, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, that's what this is referring to, of going to North Africa. It was our first, I believe it was our first naval fight that we had as a country, was going over there. All right, another lesser known part of history is what's known as the Barbary slave trade. This is where Muslim pirates enslaved Europeans. It's estimated that between the 16th and 18th century, 1 million to 1.25 million Europeans were captured as slaves. So, to put this in perspective, it's estimated that the United States had 400,000 slaves from Africa. So this was 2.5 times as many. Pretty big deal. Now, there was 12 million African slaves taken. Most of them went to the Caribbean and Brazil and places like that. U.S. had about 400,000. We were 4% of the African slave trade. But so compared to the United States, the amount of slaves that we had here, the Muslims were 2.5 times as many. And for political reasons and other reasons, it's a narrative that's never talked about. All right. One more thing that also helped the Ottoman Empire decline was colonialism. So the colonialism of the 18 and 1900s, there were pros and cons to it. I know, once again, history just talks about the cons, and there were some terrible cons about colonialism. When you look at like Belgium, Leopold the First, he estimated that he killed 10 million people in the Congo. They call him the Butcher of the Congo. So there were a number of things about colonialism that were not good, but part of the result of it, some of these lands that England and France and these other countries took over were Muslim controlled lands. And there's actually reports of people that thanked them because they liked living under the Christians much more than they liked living under the Muslims. So no perfect solution. And I'm not saying this was, it's just, it is what it is. Because of colonialism, it really Islam took more of a hurting. All right. So the Ottomans, they started seeing the handwriting on the wall, and many of them westernized. A lot of them started wearing Western suits. They shaved their beards. And I don't know if it's simply the matter of they decided to go with the winning team, or if it's part of what Islam believes, which we'll get to that in a little bit here. So the Ottoman Empire in World War I, they joined the side of Austro-Hungary, and in their defeat, the empire was dissolved. So this is where we're starting to get closer to modern history. One little thing in this time period was another thing that history books don't mention much, and that's the Armenian genocide. This was where Ottoman Turks rounded up Armenian Christians and butchered them to the tune of 1.5 million within just a couple of years. Or they rounded up 1.5 million, and over 1 million were killed. And I heard a story once, and it's one of those stories that has stayed with me because I found it really profound. It said that they would sometimes come to these small villages, and they'd get all the men and they'd bring them to the center of the village, and they would either ask them if they're a Christian, or they would tell them to renounce Christ. And if they said no, they'd blow their brains out right in front of everybody. And several things struck me about that. One is just the horror of it. It's terrible. But the other is they didn't ask them doctrine. They didn't ask them, what denomination are you? Are you a Sabbath keeper? Are you a Sunday keeper? No, those questions. Just, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And if you said yes, done. Just that's just something to really ponder and consider, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. All right. So at this time period after World War I, you had what was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It was actually a secret agreement that it became public, and that's where England and France divide up the Arab states. So I think Russia had to approve it too. So you can kind of see on the map here, it's a mess. It was a mess on purpose. You had disparate groups in each of these provinces that are here. So you would have Sunnis and Shias and Kurds, and like Iraq had several different ethnic groups and religious groups, and the Brits and the French purposely did that so that they would be easier to control because they'd have so much tension and infighting. In one sense, can you blame them for doing that? We've just seen the two major waves in history of Islam pretty much taking over half of Europe. what's going to cause them from doing that again. So once again, were there some really horrible byproducts of that? Yes, but purely from a physical standpoint, you can know why they did it. Hey, people are a threat. They say they're going to be a threat. They keep being a threat. So this will kind of, maybe put a damper on that. And that has caused a lot of the conflict we see in the Middle East today. Back when Saddam Hussein first Gulf War, he was attacking and killing Kurds, and it's the Sunni Shia problem. It's all right. One other thing like this happened in India. In 1947, you had the partition of India. So it was under British rule. And so they decided to give it back to them, but they realized they were going to have a problem on their hands because you've got Hindus and Buddhists. And so they created the countries of East Pakistan and West Pakistan and said those will be Muslim controlled, and then India will be Hindu controlled. East Pakistan ends up becoming Bangladesh in 1971. But this was a massive disaster too, because it's estimated you had 12 to 20 million people try to cross borders because they don't want to be in Hindu controlled lands if they're Muslim, or they don't want to be in Muslim controlled lands if they're Hindus. And estimates are as low as 200,000 to as high as 2 million people that died as a result. It's one of the biggest mass displacements of human beings in history. So it was a real mess. And that's part of the reason India and Pakistan still hate each other today and have issues. Okay, so as we start moving forward to the 1950s, the U.S. replaced Britain and France as the primary power, and they started focusing on oil reserves. So they had what was called the Red Line Agreement, which was set up in 1928, where American, British, and French oil companies, they basically formalized a monopoly on oil exploration in ex-Ottoman territories, and they agreed to not compete independently within these red-lined areas. So we started getting into, 1953, the reason that we set up the Shah was they wanted to nationalize oil, and we said no. 1970s was the formation of the petrodollar with Kissinger and all that. So that's getting into more modern times until the last couple of things, which would have been the Gulf Wars. You had the first Gulf War in, 90, 91, then Iraq and Afghanistan, 2003, 2004. That'd be a whole nother conversation on whether they were justified or why we're there or what's going on. That they've been messy, longer than anticipated. Probably has a lot to do with oil and resources. But I think it also has something to do with the threat of Islam, because they do what they say they're going to do. And it's been proven in history that they will jihad. So let's talk about modern times now, and then we'll get into Islamic beliefs and kind of tie all this together. Since Britain, France, and U.S. became dominant, has Islam changed? Have their tenets changed? Have their philosophies changed? Has the Quran changed? The answer to that is no. Have their tactic changed? Yes. What we're seeing right now is the jihad of the womb. Battle of the womb. It's a term that demographers use to describe the strategy of higher birth rates in nations that have lower birth weights. So the average Muslim family has 5.2 children, where most of your Western families have 1.2 children. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out over time you're going to see a massive increase in the populations of Islamic citizens in a country compared to its Western counterparts, because in many cases, many European nations are not at replacement levels. So not only are they being outbred they're having to bring in immigrants to take care of an aging population. So it's a double whammy. So let's look at some estimates of demographics about Islam in Europe and America. As a share of the world population in 1990, you had 4.2 billion, or I'm sorry, 1.1 billion Muslims compared to 4.29 non-Muslims, 19.9% of the world population. It's estimated in 2030, it's going to be 24% of the world population with 6.1. So that's going from 19.9 to 26.4. It's a pretty big. It's estimated that Albania is 80% Muslim, Bosnia 50%, Russia 10 to 14%, France 10%, Sweden 8%, Belgium 7.6, Austria 6.9 to 8, Netherlands 7.1, Germany 6 to 7, Switzerland 6, UK 6. The adult Muslim population in France has grown from 0.5% in 1985 to be an estimated 7% in 2025. This is just the adults. France is having a major problem with not only Islamic immigration, but being outbred. The top Muslim nations by population, number one is Indonesia, which that's an interesting little rabbit hole to go down. Islam. A lot of times we tend to think Arab, and that's where it started. But you don't have to be an Arab to be Islam. They'll take over everywhere they can get. Pakistan's next, India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Egypt, Iran, and Turkey. Here's some percentages with the numbers. UK has 6 million. This is as of 2023. UK has 6 million, which is 4% of the population. France has 6.5, which is 10%. Germany has 5.5 million, which is 7%. Italy has 4 million, which is 8%. Canada, 1.8 million, which is 5%. Philippines, 12 million, which is 10%. And Russia, that one surprised me. And Philippines did too. Russia has 25 million Muslims, which is 17% of the population. USA has 4.5 million, which is 1.3%. Muslim sources, however, say it's 6.7 and is 2%. So things get politicized. So sometimes it's hard to trust these numbers. They might actually be much higher. And you can see the five biggest states. Michigan is number 6 because a lot of people will say, where's Michigan? They're number 6. But New York has by far the most Muslims, which not surprising that they elect a Muslim mayor. These are city propers, not metro areas. Chicago is 9% Muslim. I had to go by Midway Airport like 6 months ago, and like every sign was in Arabic. I just every woman I saw was in a hijab, and yeah, it was different. You can see the other cities on here. A lot of them are in and around New York City, but then Michigan are some of the highest percentage-wise. Dearborn, Michigan, suburb of Detroit, it's 45% Muslim. All right, so let's get into the beliefs of Islam, and then we can go ahead and kind of tie this up. What time was it? 8:40? Okay, perfect. All right. I'm going to go over the official beliefs of Islam first, the PC ones, the ones you'll see on Wikipedia. They believe in a profession of faith, sincerely reciting the declaration that there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. They believe in prayer, performing ritual prayers 5 times a day facing Mecca, which I think a group, one of them does it 3 times, one does 5. I don't remember if it's Shia or Sunni. And then some of them have their hands like this and some cross. There's slight variations. But they believe in giving alms, giving a percentage of one's wealth to the poor and needy. They believe in fasting, abstaining from food and drink during daylight hours in the month of Ramadan. And they believe in a pilgrimage, performing the pilgrimage to Mecca at least once if physically and financially able. Sounds good, doesn't it? All right, how about the 6 articles of faith of Islam? Belief in Allah, the oneness and uniqueness of God, who is omnipotent and merciful. Belief in angels, unseen beings created by God to carry out his commands. Belief in holy books. The Quran is believed to be the final, unadulterated word of God, following previous revelations like the Torah or Gospel. Belief in prophets. God sent messengers to humanity, including Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, with Muhammad being the final prophet. Belief in the day of judgment, life after death, where individuals are judged for their actions and sent to paradise or hell. and belief in predestination, the belief that God has knowledge of all that will occur while humans still have free will. All right, so these are the, when you see the beliefs of Islam, the 5 pillars and the 6 articles of faith, that's a lot of what you're going to see. So let's look at the Quran for a minute. Muhammad died in 632. Several of his scribes wrote down his utterances and started compiling them several years after he died. It was codified in 656 AD. It's approximately 40% of the size of the New Testament. There's 77,400 words in the Quran compared to 180,000 in the New Testament. Islam teaches that tafsir, that doesn't look like the right word. No, I think it is actually. Commentaries are fundamental in understanding because they provide the necessary context, linguistic depth, and historical background to understand the divine message accurately. So, hadith literature, it's essentially Islamic Talmud, is the second primary source of Islamic law, theology, and guidance, second only to the Quran. It records the sayings, actions, and approvals of Muhammad, offering practical applications of Quranic principles such as prayer methods, ethical guidelines, and legal rulings. It's essential for understanding and practicing Islam authentically. And these were compiled for over 200 years after Muhammad's death. So, kind of maybe surmise how the Quran got to be, or how these two interact. He has these utterances, says stuff, they compile it, they write it in a book, and then they add this other stuff like, well, he also said this, he also said this, he did this, he did this. And so over 200 years, they compiled that together. And supposedly it's a help to explain the Quran, because as you take a look at Muhammad's life, the Quran is supposed to be a summation of what he does, and it conflicts itself everywhere. And so that's why these commentaries are necessary, or this hadith literature is necessary, because it's like, oh, let me tell you what it means. You need this to figure it out, because if you just try to read it yourself, you're going to like, this is crazy. All right. Islam teaches that the original Torah, Psalms, and Gospels were divine revelations from Allah, but believes the current Bible has been corrupted over time through alteration, deletion, or addition. Therefore, Muslims believe the Quran is the final protected and authoritative guide, acknowledging the Bible only where its contents align with Islamic theology. How consistent is that? You know, Mormons, they go to the Book of Mormon. A lot of SDAs will go to Ellen White's writings. Anytime you've got stuff that's added, it seems like that's what the adherents will go to rather than the original. And it's no different with Islam. Islam believes themselves to be an extension of Judaism and Christianity, but believe it's fixed the problems of both religions. Islam and the Quran refer to Jews and Christians as people of the book, and they officially have tolerance for them. Officially. But they have no tolerance for atheists, pagans, Hindus, or Buddhists. Don't like them at all. All right. This is where we're going to get to kind of the meat of the message. Let's look at some of the less politically correct beliefs of the Quran. We're going to read some verses from the Quran, and then you can maybe see why Islam does what it does. There are 79 verses in the Quran that mention engaging in war with non-Muslims. Surah 9:5. When the 4 forbidden months are over, wherever you encounter the idolaters, kill them, seize them, besiege them, wait for them at every lookout post. But if they turn to God, maintain the prayer, and pay the prescribed alms, got to give us that tax money, let them go on their way, for God is most forgiving and merciful. Yeah. Their way or the highway, real forgiving. Surah 4:89. They wish that you should disbelieve just as they disbelieve, so that you may be all alike. Do not therefore take from them allies until they immigrate in the ways of Allah. But if they turn their backs on immigration, in other words, if he leaves Islam, seize them and slay them wherever you come upon them. Take none of them for your ally or helper. This is the verdict on those hypocritical confessors of faith who belong to a belligerent non-Muslim nation and actually participate in acts of hostility against the Islamic State. This is very similar to Freemasonry and witchcraft, and anybody that tries to leave, you're dead. We will kill you. uh, you know, what does the Bible say? Like, if someone strays from the faith, you try to like pray for them and hope that they would come back. The guy from First Corinthians 5 ends up coming back. Um, if they don't, then don't have anything to do with them. But you don't murder them. Here, it's anybody that leaves the faith, you're gone. You're dead. Surah 8:12. Remember, thy Lord inspired the angels with the message. I am with you. Give firmness to the believers. I will instill terror into the hearts of the unbelievers. Smite ye above their necks and smite all their fingertips off them. Yes, Islam is so peaceful. Surah 456. Surely we shall cast those who reject our signs into the fire, and as often as their skins are burnt out, we shall give them other skins in exchange that they may fully taste the chastisement. Surely Allah is almighty, all wise. Yeah, so we'll burn people alive and then we'll pray that they get new skins so we can torture them again. Surah 434. Men are the protectors and maintainers of women because Allah has made one of them excel over the other and because they spend out of their possessions to support them. Thus, righteous women are obedient and guard the rights of men in their absence under Allah's protection. As for women of whom you fear rebellion, admonish them and remain apart from them in beds and beat them. Then, if they obey you, do not seek ways to harm them. Allah is exalted, great. What does the Bible say about how you're to treat your wife? Right here, it's like, oh, if they do something you don't like, you can beat them. Surah al-Barak 2:191. Kill them wherever you confront them and drive them out from where they drove you out. For though killing is sinful, wrongful persecution is even worse than killing. Do not fight against them near the holy mosque unless they fight against you. But if they fight against you, kill them, for that is the reward of such unbelievers. Surah 929. Those who do not believe in Allah and the last day, even though they were given the scriptures, and who do not hold as unlawful that which Allah and his messenger have declared to be lawful, and who do not follow the true religion, fight against them until they pay tribute out of their hand and are utterly subdued. One author that I was listening to a video of him on YouTube, he made a really good point about the distinction between the wars of the Old Testament and the way that Islam is, or the Quran is written. Yes, when they went into the promised land, God did have Israel, clean up some nations, but it was specific. It was, take care of the Jebusites or the Canaanites or whoever. Allah is open-ended, or not Allah. The Quran is open-ended. There's no specificity to it. It's extremely ambiguous. It's like anytime, anywhere that anybody's not like us and doesn't believe what we do, here's what you do to them. Huge difference between the belief systems in that regard. 33:48, and obey not the disbelievers and the hypocrites, and harm them not till you are ordered. Yeah, got to get your cleric to let you know it's okay to kill people. All right. A few other things here. What does Islam teach about Jesus? Because if you'll hear Muslims sometimes talk about Jesus, they believe he's a prophet. Here's what they believe. They believe he was a prophet, and that's about it. They teach that Allah does not have a son, so Jesus cannot be the son of God. They believe there was a guy named Jesus, but they don't believe he's God's son because Allah never had a son. The best that a Muslim believer can be to Allah is a slave. Immediately, whenever I read stuff like this, I think of scripture. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, right? I call you friends. It's such a different, it's relational. The Bible's relational. We have a father, we have a son, like we can commune with them. Here you're a slave. That's the best you're going to be as a slave, obedient slave. The Quran teaches that he was born to the Virgin Mary without a father, created by the same divine command that brought Adam into existence. Islam teaches that Jesus will return to earth before the day of judgment to defeat the Antichrist, who they call Masad ad-Dalag. Don't ask me to get that right, and to restore justice. So they believe he is coming back. Jesus, that they call him Isa, He's mentioned frequently in the Quran, 25 times, and he's also referred to as the Messiah, the Word, and a spirit from God. So Deuteronomy 18:18, I mentioned this earlier. This is Moses speaking, or God speaking through Moses. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And it shall be that whoever will not hear my words, which he speaks in my name, I will require it of him. Um, we know that's speaking of Jesus. Muhammad said, as I said earlier, he said that was about him, not Jesus. And I read an account that Muhammad expected to go to the Jews and have them accept him as the prophet and point to this verse and say, I'm this guy. And they just laughed at him. I think that's part of the reason he couldn't stand Jews is because his guy was a narcissist, like high level, high functioning narcissist, probably even a sociopath. Huge ego. I'm the prophet. I'm the guy. God only talks through me, and he expected others to accept him. And when they didn't, it seems like that's when he got murderous. But, anyways, getting back to what they believe about Jesus, he's recognized for performing miracles that Allah allowed, including speaking in the cradle. I don't remember that in the Bible. Healing the blind and leper, bringing clay birds to life. That one's interesting. And raising the dead. Muslims believe Jesus was not crucified or killed. The Quran teaches that it only appeared to people that he was, but God raised him up for himself. So this is a verse from the Quran, and it says, "We killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, but they neither killed nor crucified him. It was only made to appear so. Even those who argue for this crucifixion are in doubt, for they have no knowledge whatsoever, only making assumptions. They certainly did not kill him." Well, I got a real problem with that one. In fact, if you dig into what some of the Muslims believe, some of them teach that Judas was crucified, and they made Judas look like Jesus, so people thought it was Jesus that was crucified. Islam does believe in an antichrist. That's his name up there. He's described as a one-eyed man with a blind right eye, with a red complexion, curly hair, and broad shoulders. The letters KFR for kafir will be written on his forehead, visible to believers. Once again, nobody else sees this guy with a KFR on his head. Well, you're not a believer. That's why you can't see it. Convenient. He'll cause rain. He will revive the dead, command earth's treasures to follow him. He will accept and rule the world. Angels will guard Mecca and Medina, preventing him from entering. He will appear in the east, likely Khurasan, during a time of famine and hardship. And he will be killed by Jesus and will defer to the Mahdi, who will bring peace. So as we get into Islamic eschatology, the Mahdi is an important character for them. He's also known as the 12th Imam. So there's differences in thought between the Sunnis and the Shiites, as we'll explain here. He's a messianic figure in Islamic eschatology, destined to appear at the end of times to eliminate evil, restore justice, and rule before the day of judgment. Believed to be a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, he will unite Muslims, leading to a period of peace, often alongside the return of Jesus. Sunnis believe the Mahdi is a future leader who's not been born yet, though they believe in his emergence. For Shias, the Mahdi is a core part of their theology. They believe he is Muhammad al-Mahdi, the 12th Imam, who was born in the 9th century and is currently in hiding until he reappears. So one group thinks this guy's coming. He just hasn't emerged yet. The other thinks he lived, 9th century? Yeah, long time ago, and is just chilling out until the time is right. But Islam believes in both a messianic figure, which is not Jesus, and they believe in an antichrist figure as well. All right, let's look a little bit at martyrdom in Islam. A martyr, known as a shaheed, is promised high rewards for sacrificing their life for righteousness, holding one of the highest ranks in paradise. Key rewards include immediate forgiveness of sins at the first drop of blood, which that's very works-based, isn't it? Yeah, if I do this, then my sins are forgiven. Exemption from the trials of the grave, safety from the day of judgment's terror, and marriage to spouses in paradise. Martyrs are considered alive with their Lord, not dead. Martyrs are promised rewards in paradise depending on the Hadith interpretation. And that's where you get the notion of the 72 virgins. The Quran does not actually state that, but the interpretations of the Quran state that. I think the Quran just says that you can have whatever you want if you die a martyr's death for Islam. Okay, I think we're almost about done. I saved this one. I think it's last, if not, it's close to the end because it's a huge part of Muslim belief. Taqiyya. Taqiyya is hiding one's religious identity when under duress or persecution. This deceit, which is doctrinally grounded in Islam, is often depicted as being equal, sometimes superior to other universal military virtues such as courage, fortitude, or self-sacrifice. In other words, it's a license to lie, even that it's holy to deceive your enemies. Like it's considered a high honor to be able to deceive somebody, particularly if the situation dictates it. You know, completely the opposite of what the Bible talks about being a martyr, right? Publicly, remember when was it Peter or Paul and was it Barnabas or Silas, and they got thrown in prison? And what's the first thing they do after they're supernaturally let out of prison? Even though there was opposition, they went and kept preaching. Here it's the opposite. It's for all of their machismo attitudes, they sure have a lot of cowardly ideas. But this is one of them. It's not only is it okay to lie, it's holy to lie if it's done to your enemies. All right. And I think I'm just this last quote that I've got. If you remember when I talked about the first Barbary War, Thomas Jefferson tried peaceful negotiations. He basically was like, hey, what can we work out? Like, can we do trade with you guys? Like, can we and he couldn't understand why they wouldn't do business with him, because that usually works with most nations. You try to be reasonable and they might be reasonable back. This is a response Jefferson got. When Jefferson asked the envoy the reasoning concerning the hostile actions, Ambassador Sid Haj Abdurrahman responded, "It was written in our Quran that all nations which had not acknowledged the prophet were sinners, whom it was the right and duty of the faithful to plunder and enslave, and that every Muslim man who was slain in this warfare was sure to go to paradise." So he was pretty open. This is what we believe. This is why we attack your ships, because you don't acknowledge the prophet, so you're sinners, and our Quran says it's okay to do so. So to maybe summarize in a couple of sentences what Islam is, because this is a brief history. I know it's even going an hour and a half. It's still just a drop in the bucket of what they believe, but I tried to hit on the high points and things that were a little bit memorable. You've got Muhammad. The guy's nuts. Guy does whatever he wants. The stuff he does is written down. They believe it came from God, so they believe everything Muhammad did was holy, and that he was the icing on the cake for Judaism and Christianity, and he redeemed religions, and so this is the pure faith that he brings back. So as a result, when you look at the things that Muhammad did, and you do that, you're going to kill the infidels. You're going to lie. You're going to plunder. You're going to, one of the stories, I wasn't going to say this, but maybe I will. Part of the reason for the Crusades was it got back that some of the pilgrims that were going to Jerusalem, they took a nun and they made everybody else watch, and they gang raped her until she died. Because it's okay for them to do that. Because Allah said it was okay. Because Muhammad did it. That's the sickness of this religion, this ideology. I think I would rather live under communism than live under Islam when you really look at what they teach. And once again, they can deceive as much as they want. Look at their actions. Look at what they did 100 years after their founding, and they took over 3/4 of Christian Europe. They've got pushed back. still maintained a lot of land. Then the Ottomans come on, later, and they do the same thing again. And this is what they are going to do because it's a horrible ideology. Don't confuse the people with the ideology. It's just because somebody's Arab doesn't make them a bad person. There's a lot of Arab Christians. There's a lot of Arabs that are not Muslim, but it's the ideology that's the cancer. And it is sick because it's a blending of the worst. I think it's why so many Mongols converted to Islam, because it's like, hey, this is what we do anyways, but you're saying that not only is it good, it's holy, and we're going to be rewarded for it in paradise and have anything we want if we do what we're doing anyways. Yeah, we'll sign up for that. Sounds great. So in a sense, that's what Islam is. It's a personality cult revolving around Muhammad. And when you read what Muhammad did, he was a maniac. So now, do you have what are known as moderate Muslims? Yes, but from what I've read, and listening to a lot of ex-Muslim authors or people that grew up in these areas, the way they describe it is a moderate Muslim is one that doesn't really practice Islam. They may go to the mosque once in a while and they'll say they're a Muslim, but they're not real serious about it. It's more cultural. Somebody that's serious about it is going to be radical. So we hear a lot about radical Islam. Anybody that truly practices Islam is going to be radical because that's what it says. And a danger of what's been happening in more recent times with the information age is a lot of people are just reading the Quran for themselves, and they're like, why aren't we doing this? You guys are acting so peaceful. Why aren't we doing this? Because this is what Allah said, right? This is what Muhammad did. We need to do this. And so those are a lot of the types of people that, join ISIS or these other very militant groups. But if you look at Islam as a whole, the moderate ones are the ones that just don't follow it. It's either cultural or they had to pick something or their family did it or whatever. So the danger becomes when people get serious about the religion. And so what does it take? If we've got 4.5 million Muslims in the US, what if 1% were radical, what we'd call radical? That's still a lot. That still could do a lot of damage. So it's the ideology that's the problem. So that's to hear George Bush say Islam's a religion of peace and it's misunderstood. It's like either somebody misinformed him or he was lying, because it's anything but. It does not take that much research to realize what the religion is about and why. Once again, getting back to Ishmael, it was prophesied that it was going to be like this. He'd be a wild man and his hands would be, against his brothers. So maybe one more thing before we get to questions and answers is I've got 3 authors here or on YouTube that I got a lot of information from. Mostly the first guy, Raymond Ibrahim, he's a Coptic Christian, or he grew up a Coptic Christian. That's a Christian in Egypt. And so he's fluent in Arabic. And he said it floored him when he started reading the Quran in Arabic, because he realized how much they sugarcoated stuff in English. And when you actually read it in Arabic, he's like, yeah, this is pretty bad. But he's got a book called Sword and the Scimitar, got a lot of good content on YouTube, as well as the next 2 guys, Usama Dakdak and Shahram Hadrian. I don't really know so much about their backgrounds, but the 3 of them basically say the same thing, and where I got a lot of my information from with them, and a lot of my research was due to the kind of the direction that they pointed me. So, okay, I think that's the end of my slides. So I know it's probably maybe a little bit dry, but I think it's important to know what the Quran states, who Muhammad was, and why the ideology is a real problem and a real threat. I will say, before I go to questions, the one thing, and I meant to start with this, Islam is not our biggest threat. It is a threat. And I do think it's probably being used as a judgment against the United States and Israel for their sins. Our biggest threat's unrepentance. Because if we repent as a nation, we are under his protection again. And Islam's not as much of a threat. But when you've got a nation that has become as sinful as us and that educates people abdicating their authority, a vacuum then happens. And because it's such a weird paradox of why the leftists are in bed with Islam when, so many of them claim to be for women's rights or like rights for gays and all this stuff. And they're like, do you know what Islam believes? Do you know what they do to women? Uh, Anyways, it's I'll leave it at that. So yeah, questions if you've got them.
At this point, question and answer. We'd ask everybody please stay on topic. 2 minutes for your comments and wait to be addressed. Don't just jump in and say stuff. Have chaos real quick that way if we do that. So please wait to be addressed. Kayleen.
Yes, thank you. So, being thank you first for the very good presentation, and there's still some things I could add to it that I know because the Philippines has been under Islam, some or a war, jihad, since 1521 when Magellan came. So, but even before that, I would think the natives, because each tribe in the Philippines, like here in Palawan, they know their history of having a war with the Muslims, and that they had the treaty that you're not supposed to go over this line of part of the area. So um, so up to now, we are fighting Islam in the sense they have gone into the schools, politics, um, as you say, the womb. But
Mm-hmm.
here, it's not just the womb. You have to be aware, like your mayor in New York, and it's even done in the UK. And when you said about the nun being raped, that's true. Even I think here, and here we call them before Moro. So they do lie. They will that's why there's a saying Moro Moro, but the present one don't like that word because it's bad, because they do they're traitors. That's the word. They will befriend you and then stab you in the back. So that's how the mindset of even me, I'm cautious with the Muslims. Although like the Lord let me be with the Bajau tribe, so they have been also under the Muslim influence, but they're not violent. But there's a tribe, the Tausog, they're the ones who are strong and pushy. So that's the balance of where it all goes. Like, and then with the women, how do you talk to them is the women's rights. Like at present, we were shocked that the 14-year-old, I mean, sorry, the 19, was she 19 or 8? Anyway, 17 or 18, she got married. And then it was so easy for them to divorce. And now, after a year, we're shocked. She's married again. And we don't know if it's really her choice or her parents' choice till now at this time, this age. So I would think it's the same for all Muslims. And the best way, I think, like what's happening in Iran, we pray that they have dreams and visions of Jesus Christ, And that's very powerful for them because they believe that God is talking through them in dreams and visions. And that's why there's a big converse in Iran right now and in other places. So your topic today is very important, but I had to had that topic like 10 years ago because we were seeing what was happening in Europe already and even in our own country. They were um, they had secretaries or Muslim young ladies or men. They would go into the congressman's apply for the a position, and then they would uh, have laws made without even passing through the proper channels, just because of favor, things like that under. So it's a challenge, and it's true. We do have to repent as Christians, but we also have to do something. And that's why uh, we have the Bajau children, the Muslim side. They are harmless when they are in small quantity,
Mm-hmm.
but they are when they go big. But also like in Mindanao, the Muslims were traders, they were quiet. They did not know that the ISIS came in because they embraced them, but they did not know that they were evil and were just using them. So that's why every time I meet a Muslim, do you want to have the same problem in Marawi again? That's the latest Muslim uprising, and ISIS came here to do that in Mindanao. And that was just a few years ago. So we're still under attack, and that's what we're doing. So thank you.
You're
Sorry,
welcome.
said
Yeah,
more than 2 minutes.
part of the reason why I started digging into this topic a few months ago was the war with Iran. People were criticizing Israel and the United States, and understandably so, but then acting like because they thought we were being part of the bad guy, that somehow Islam was the good guy. I was like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. You even know what you're talking about? People that should know better, because it's almost like this notion that if you don't pick one side, then you have to pick the other side. But the point about Islam being in small numbers and not being able to trust Muslims, um, the best description I heard about that is Oscar Schindler. Oscar Schindler was still a Nazi. Did he operate not in Nazi ideology? No. In fact, he risked his life, but he was still a Nazi. That's at least that's what he was. And he had a moral problem with what was going on and risked his life to save a bunch of Jews. Are you willing to take that risk? How many Oscar Schindlers are there in Islam? I'm sure there's some, but it's that same idea. It's the ideology is corrupt, and people that are under its sway is you pray that they have dreams, like you said, that they come out from under the spell.
Jim?
Daniel, question on theology of the Quran. Uh, Islam admits that Muhammad was illiterate.
Mm-hmm.
They also say the only way you can truly understand the Quran is to read it in Arabic. Obviously, Muhammad himself couldn't do that because he was illiterate. I haven't found a way around their hypocrisy. How do they explain that? Do you know?
Well, the I forget the name for the commentaries and the hadith literature. That almost like muddies the waters even more with a whole bunch of circular reasoning. So because it's a conflicting book, because at the beginning of Muhammad's, dare I say, ministry, he was peaceful because he had to be, because he didn't have the upper hand. Then as you get later on in his life, in other areas of the book, he's a complete maniac. and so the entire book is a contradiction. So the commentaries and the other literature, which the Hadith literature they said was 200 years of oral traditions about Muhammad, that it explains the Quran so you can understand it. So it's, you have a rational mind, Jim. That's why you don't get it, because it's not, it's a rational mind, I think, will reject Islam because it's there's no continuity to it.
So there's as much circular logic there as I think there is.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The guy Raymond Abraham, he's the one that really opened up my eyes to the deceit that they play on the West to get us to believing Islam is anything other than what it is. Because when you go back to actually reading it in Arabic, that's why they say read it in Arabic, because it's pretty explicit on how you're supposed to be towards non-believers.
Let's throw a quick comment in here. Tagore and I were talking one time when he was in India. He moved back to India, and the Sikhs came up. I brought up, where did these Sikhs come from? And he said they were a sect that was formed to get rid of the Muslims. And at the truck stops, you can watch this. You can see the Sikhs are all neat and clean. They usually, got nice clothes on, very polite, very helpful. And when they encounter a Muslim, they stop dead in their tracks. The hair stands up in the back of their necks, and so does the Muslim. There is no love between those two groups, and they do fight. So I think that was when that happened in India. They formed a group to get rid of the Muslims. Now that was the Tagore paraphrase, but I find it interesting that they tried to do something about it.
The same thing's starting to happen in Europe, in France and England, because people are like, we got to do something. This is getting insane. But India has over 200 million Muslims.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Mm-hmm. And most of the truck drivers that we have that are quote foreigners are Sikhs. A lot of them from Canada.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to throw in a quick fact. 200 million Muslims in India. Now remember, Afghanistan and Pakistan were part of India, and they separated them off because there were too many Muslims there. So how many Muslims would there be if they were back together as part of the greater India?
200 plus million in Pakistan, and I'm not sure how many are in Afghanistan, but yeah, that's, you probably be pushing half a billion. I guess you get less questions when there's not a lot of theology in the message.
Well, there's a lot to think about here, and I was shocked. Just a personal input here. I had not realized how, and I'm not a history person. And when you talk about dates and stuff, it's like, okay, that's fine. But watching how far they got, and it's kind of like, this is nothing to take lightly. They did it before. They can do it again. So I was shocked. It was an eye-opening presentation, and I thank you for it. It was awesome. John?
Finally, I got them buttons right. Yeah. Thanks for the presentation, Dan. I converted to Christianity about 50 years ago, and through time, I've noticed that I've seen a lot of people fall off, and they usually go to Roman religion. I'm yet to see one, but maybe it's the part of the world I live in. I never see them go to Islam for some reason. Some even, I've even seen some go to the occult, but most of them just go back to Roman religion. And I noticed when I was in England for a feast one time that it was only a short time, maybe a couple hundred years prior, that uh, they had drugged a Christian for working on Sunday. Uh, they drug him 9 miles and burned him at the stake, and that was Roman religion doing that to the Christians. The poor Christians, no matter where they turn, they're in trouble. Whether Roman religion getting them or the Islam or whoever, but I just thought maybe if you, Dan, noticed anybody, you've been on this road a long time, if you've noticed any of Christians returning to or converting to Islam, I've seen most of them just go back to Roman religion.
No, I never have. It was interesting looking at the demographics. States like Wyoming, there's almost no Islam. There's like in Montana, very low. I'm in the Ozarks. Springfield, I guess, has one mosque. I think it's small. St. Louis has more. Kansas City has more. But even still, they're not hotbeds. It's almost like the strategy of Islam is they will plant seeds in areas, but then they just try to take that centralized and then spread it. Like Dearborn, Michigan, that's heavily concentrated. Chicago's
Right.
getting that way, heavily concentrated. So that almost seems more their strategy of rather than I don't think they do much conversion through reason and evangelism.
Well, I see. Wasn't it that one singer he converted to Islam?
Cat Stevens?
Yeah,
That's
Cat.
Stevens.
But I think
Yeah.
he was Roman religion before that.
Probably. There's
yeah.
been a few.
Christmas, Easter, and all that stuff. They converted to Islam.
Well, you can see their strategy, particularly like in the '60s, going against in America, targeting the black men to try to get that, like Muhammad Ali, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You had some.
Yeah.
It probably is an attempt to destabilize the country
Right.
because most blacks are Christians. So
Yeah, I just wondered whether anybody on the forum here had seen anybody from their fellowship or whatever convert to Christian Islam. I know quite a few Roman religion people do, but
sure.
but the Christians, I never see any that in my travels. And about 50 years ago, I converted from Roman religion to Christianity, and I never see anybody. I I know one that went to our cult, but I never see any go to Islam for some reason.
No, I haven't either.
Oh, all right. I just thought I'd check, but maybe in a different part of the world, maybe that's not true. I don't know. I'm done. Thanks, Dan.
Jim?
So John,
Yeah, just a quick note for John and then a question for Dan. And I don't mean to hang you out to dry. I'll give you some info on my part. Women, John, women who have married Islamic men, I've seen convert. Dan, part of the Islamic religion says that you not only can, but should lie to non-believers about what Islam is doing. It's right there in the Quran. It's very clear. It's very simple. How many Christians and Jews do you think know that? I think it's 10%. Do you
Agreed.
think it's more?
No, I don't think very many people know that at all because for whatever reason, it's been whitewashed. Like, I mean, after 9/11, I didn't know a ton about Islam, but I remember when George Bush got up there and said it's a religion of peace. I'm like, that's hogwash. I know enough about it to know it's not. But that's part of the reason going over the precepts is important to know what they what they believe, what they teach.
Gloria?
in any of your discussion, in any of your research, have you come across Baha'i? And what are your thoughts on the Baha'i? The reason I ask, South Carolina, after Christianity, Baha'i is the number 2 here in South Carolina.
What I'm guessing they're the same ethnicity of in South Carolina.
Many of them are Persian, but they're making inroads into Christianity. Even one of the people that I went to college with is now Baha'i. So um, they came after Muhammad, so they are persecuted by the Muslims, and like yeah, they're persecuted by the Muslims. And my friend who is Persian said that they trace their descendants as Baha'i to Keturah's sons, which I thought was interesting, and I don't think she understood what she was really telling me, which is why when God says he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he's saying which line he's really working with.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So
I don't really know much about Baha'i. I think it was started in like the 1800s, like maybe in Iran, modern day Iran. But I don't think it's considered Islamic. I could be wrong. I'm not real familiar with it.
yeah, they do something very similar. They observe Ramadan.
Hmm.
And so there are some similarities there, but they're also persecuted by the Muslims. So
Okay.
I'm done.
Gail?
Hi. Sorry. What they do also is like if a man marries, what they do in your country and in UK, they marry several women, get them pregnant, and put them in different apartments and apply for single women, what's that, solo parents. So that's how they get their money, and then they still keep making babies. So um here it's not, we're so aware of them that you have to form a continuous, not just spiritual warfare, but practical ways how to reach out to the women. And if you, it's first it has to be prayers, and then if you have a heart to reach out to them, especially the women, they are really second class citizens in the
Mm-hmm.
Muslim religion. So that's why they never improve. And even in education, the least are the Bajau of all the tribes in Mindanao. So very few have gone to college. Even the other tribes, maybe just a generation ago, have had or have college degree women. So while us, we know, several generations back, some are already educated. So right now, the way we can do is help them is, well, here it's through education. There it's more because if they live, they have to, they really are killed or they lose their whole family. That's the stress. I mean, you grew up in a family and now you have to really choose to either move to another continent just to escape. So that's the situation of the women.
Mm-hmm.
And um, if I would understand their heaven for the women, it's still being married to the same guy. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you're going to be one of the 72 virgins, but you're not a virgin anymore if you got married. So
Right.
uh, it's so bizarre. And unfair to the women. So thank you.
Well, I mean, it was a religion founded by a lone guy who was crazy. So yeah. Hold on, I'm freezing up here.
Yeah, good evening, and thanks, Dan, for the study. Pretty comprehensive, and always enjoyed, history lessons. I find it kind of interesting that Judaism and Islam are very close or similar in terms of practice, and neither of them really represents Christianity in any way. They have strict, monotheism. One God is and indivisible, doesn't have a son. They're very strict in terms of the law, and they have the same or very similar dietary laws. I found that interesting, and their daily rituals of prayer. It seems like uh, they were trying to copy the Jews, and because they were originally, Muhammad was originally rejected by the Jews, but it's funny how a lot of what he instituted was, in terms of practice, almost the same. And they have also one very common alignment. They don't have Christ, and they do not have redemption or love. So, it's just an additional um, point. That's it. Thanks.
Well, that would probably be a bigger rabbit hole to go down, is because at the time Muhammad lived in his area, you had a bunch of polytheist Arabs, but you also had quite a few Jews and I think a lesser amount of Christians, and so it's quite possible that he was trying to pattern stuff after the Jews, but then got rejected. So then he kind of changed his tune. One other thing, maybe just to consider, I don't know if anyone's got an insight on it, is I wonder how much this war with Iran, if there's more than meets the eye, because Iran is the only real Shia country. And I forget what percentage of the Shiites in the world live in Iran, but it's 95% Shiite, and the rest are Sunnis. That's part of the reason that the Saudis and the Gulf states don't really have Iran's side. And so when you look at Islamic eschatology and what they believe, because they've got an antichrist and they've got a messianic figure to go along with Jesus, I wonder if at some point there's going to be a bearing of the hatchet between the two, because it goes back to right after Muhammad died, the two groups formed. So that would be a really interesting thing, because some people wonder why we haven't seen sleeper cells go off and why you don't see Islam being a more unified front. But if the rift between Sunnis and Shiites went away, that would be huge. And I wonder if this war might have something to do with that. I don't know. Just thinking out loud. Can you guys still hear me? My browser seems to be acting up.
Yeah, we still hear you.
Okay.
Gloria.
That is interesting what you said, Dan. I'm also wondering, though, if it's more about, I wonder if the Muslims, though, are just pawns in whatever is being played out. I'm done.
In a lot of ways, they probably are. But what is it? Pete Hegseth, he's got a Crusader tattoo on his chest, and then that Kefir. I just read it earlier. It's like the infidel. He's got that tattooed on his arm too. So I think for a number of people, this is a holy war on both sides. Israel too. You've got a number of people of Israel that look at that they want their eschatology fulfilled as well as traditional Christians and Catholics and Islam. So it's be interesting to see if somebody actually comes and unites all these people together and we see some sort of peace.
I think it would be a Hitler piece. Piece of this, piece of that.
That's right.
John?
Yeah, you made an interesting point. If the Sunnis and the Shiites unite, there could be trouble for the Christians. But if the Roman religion unites, the Protestants and the Catholics, there's going to be trouble for the Christians too. So it's a scary world we live in.
Yeah, good point.
Jim?
Protected.
Yeah, Daniel, question for you.
So
A lot of the religions in the world, Hindu, Shia, things like that, you have people who are worshiping Satan kind of hiddenly. I've always been under the impression that Allah is actually Satan and that he's actually reveling in the fact that there are 2 billion people who are directly worshiping him as Satan rather than as a false Yeshua, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever. Just out of curiosity, what's your opinion on that?
Allah has all the characteristics of Satan. 100%. But it's like you said, it's almost like a direct manifestation of open worship of him rather than people worshiping him in an indirect way. It's almost more of a direct way.
Chris?
Well, I was just thinking of the comment that Jesus Christ made when he said, every kingdom divided against itself is destroyed, and no town or house divided against itself will stand, going back to the fact that they believe lying is okay. And it really underlines the fact that they can't trust each other. And there's no way they're going to build cohesion and unity. That is only something that is built by belief in God and Jesus Christ, because that's the only way you can trust each other. And if I do any comparison, to this house divided thing, I realize that this is, again, a common practice we would find in Judaism, which is disagreement, or, it's actually encouraged. It's also encouraged in Islam to be divided and disagree. And there's no room for unity in any of that. So, the whole idea of a fatwa is internal strife. So, there is no then what is going to happen afterwards. Nobody's asking, okay, we create this, international strife and disunity, and now we've got everybody under our control. Then what? Then what are we going to do? Are we going to usher in a new utopia of people getting along, right? So they have not thought through any of this. God has, of course, but the then what question still kind of remains for Islam. So anyway, that's my comment.
Yeah, they're really the modern day barbarians. They just mix theology with it, and I do think that one guy from the 7th century was right. They're almost like the Amalekites or some nation sent to judge Israel.